don't start a podcast to make money and have it become my job. If you're going to start a passion project like this, you need to start it because you are passionate about the topic and you're passionate about getting out to the ears of listeners and people want to hear what you're talking about.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who used to love playing on a typewriter as a child, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 71 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited that you are here with me. Thank you so much for joining me. Last week, I had Dr. Emily Krause on the show who talked about running injuries, particularly those in the hip and pelvic area. We learned what the biggest key is to staying healthy, and it's probably something you don't think about when it comes to avoiding these types of injuries. We also discussed some other really important topics like burnout in younger runners, something that I am really passionate about. So if you missed it, go back and check that one out. My guest today, we were talking after the show, and she is a fellow podcaster, someone that I should never have on my show, right? Or I should never be on her show because we're competitors, and more listeners for one of us means less listeners for the other. But both my guests and I disagree with that. The more we can build up with the running podcast, build up this community of podcasters, and particularly us both as females, the more that helps all of us. If you're listening to this, you know how awesome podcasts are, and I am always shouting from the rooftops how much I love podcasts, and I'm sure you are too if you're hooked as well. I wanted Lindsey Hein on because I think she should be celebrated, and it's okay to promote her podcast. You've heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats, or if you haven't, then you have now. And I think it's true here too. So Lindsey and I are going to talk about some pregnancy stuff, some parenting stuff, but then also a lot about how you can start a podcast if you've ever thought about doing one, especially if it's something you're really passionate about that maybe you don't see out there like Lindsey mentioned. We give you advice for that and how to grow your social media or your podcast. If you just want to stick to social media, that is fine too. This episode might be a little bit different, but I love it and I think you will too. So now, before we get to the episode, I have one request from you. It is my 30th birthday on Monday, and for that day, I have a special podcast coming, an update on how things are going with me. But I would like to ask you if I can be cheeky and ask you for a gift. But don't worry, it won't cost you a penny. Would you please consider leaving me a review on iTunes and sharing this podcast with your running community, your groups, your family and friends? That would be the best birthday gift I could ask for. And the best gift I could ask for is the podcast growing, and you sharing helps me do that. It doesn't matter whether it's this episode or not, but if you could share the most helpful episode with your loved one, that's the best gift I could ask. I am repeating myself. I am realizing that right now. Unless, of course, you would rather give me an iTunes review, you can go for that instead. But thank you so much either way. All right, that's enough bullying you. Let's meet Lindsey Hein of the I'll Have Another podcast after a word from our sponsors. Thank you to Hoka One One for sponsoring this episode of Running for Real. Hoka One One is a running shoe unlike any other. A little different, right? And maybe you're unsure if you'll like them. Well, once you run in their newest release, the Clifton 5, you will see what all the buzz is about. It has marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight to keep you comfortable throughout the day. This episode of the Running for Real podcast is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv provides audio-based workouts created by certified personal trainers available through a mobile app. New members get 30% off an annual membership by visiting aptiv.com/running for real. That's aaptiv.com/running for real. That's the number 4, running for real. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me on the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited to talk to you. We've been friends for years now, and to talk to a fellow podcaster and just to hear about how things are going. So thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, no, this is going to be really fun. And, I've been on your podcast in the past, and this is going to be something where, we're going to learn a bit about you, and we're actually going to take this in a bit of a different direction and allow people to learn a bit about, if you've ever been interested in setting up a podcast, Lindsey and I are going to kind of discuss what you could do to kind of make that a reality and not see it so scary. So, but firstly, let's talk about the thing that's probably on your mind, even though we're doing this, and the thing that's probably on other people's minds if they know you, being that you are pregnant for the 4th time, in which case, congratulations, very impressive work. I with one, I can't even imagine having 4. So just to kind of start off with that, do you feel like it did get, this is a selfish question, but I'm sure others are interested. Is, 1 to 2 is obviously going to be a big jump, but is 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, is it kind of like, well, I got it down now, or does it just keep compiling and getting harder and harder with each one?
I think I'm hoping that 3 to 4 is just like, okay, you're with us now, you're along for the ride, and it's going to be not so hard. But I would say 2 to 3 was really, really hard for us. It was just so much extra chaos. Yeah. And our second and third are pretty close in age. I mean, I know there are crazy people out there that have babies that are like 14 months apart or even or less. But our 2 to 3, they are 21 months apart, and 3 to 4 will be 22 months apart. And I just think once you get underneath 2 years there, it's hard because you need to protect your newborn from the crazy toddler,
Mm-hmm. But is it, I've been thinking about this a lot. Is it better to do them close together, or better to, if you had in a perfect world, do it, is it better to do it closer, or is it better to do it like 4 or 5 years apart, but then they're not really going to grow up together? Have you thought about that at all?
Well, I will say we kind of struggled to get pregnant with our first one. And
which is funny now hearing you say that.
Now I'm like, I know people probably roll their eyes like, oh, of course she's pregnant again, because there are a lot of people that struggle with infertility. And so I have a really soft heart for that. But after we had our first, we kind of just were like, okay, well, since it took so long, I mean, it didn't take insanely long, but it was like 2.5 years of trying and 2 miscarriages. Yeah. So it was a little bit of a long road for us. And so after that, I was just like, well, it took us so long that I'm not going to, use birth control or anything. The second one, it was 2.5 years, which that definitely was a little bit of a more breather for me as far as age gap wise. And then the third one came so quickly. And then the fourth one, I think we kind of always wanted to have 4 kids, but I wasn't really emotionally ready for this one just yet. Don't get me wrong. I'm so grateful, and I know how blessed we are, but I was I cried. I know that sounds so selfish, but I cried when I found out I was pregnant because I was a year postpartum, and I was just getting to the point where I felt like myself. I was feeling fit and feeling emotionally good. And I thought, oh no, we're going right back into this. So it was kind of hard. Like I remember I went to the gas station and bought a pregnancy test on the way to pick up my oldest from school. And I could not handle it. I was like, I have to go into the school. I have to get out of my car, park, and go in and take this test with him in the bathroom with me. And I just knew, because I think I was like 2 days late on my period, and I just knew. And my husband was putting Russ down. That's our youngest. And I just looked at him and I was like, I'm pregnant.
You looked at Glenn and said that?
Yeah. I looked at Glenn. I'm like, I'm pregnant. And he's like, what? And not to mention, it was kind of just an emotional time in our lives because his mother had passed away a couple months before. And so there was a lot of emotions stirred up this past fall. Yeah,
which is not easy with your pregnancy hormones adding to that, I am sure, with them flying up and down. So it had to be pretty tough. And you have found out since, you're obviously quite far along by now, but this is going to be your 4th boy.
Yeah.
So I know you have not held back from saying that you did want a girl. You've always wanted to have a girl. Not that you're disappointed, not that you're kind of, another boy kind of sad about it. But was there any part of you that kind of, you put this video online of when you kind of found out and as much as you were excited, I think you could kind of tell that you were like, really? Come on, like, can I not have, the little tutu girl kind of thing? How was that having to, as runners, we're so used to kind of being able to control so much of our outcomes and, what happens with us. Did any part of you struggle with that to think that, you're going to have 4 boys, which in themselves, even if you just think of boys alone, are a lot more work and just intense than girls are?
Yeah, I think that people always ask me this question. People always say, are you going to try for a girl? And I've always said no. Every boy that I've had, I'm like, no, because you can't control that. You can't control with the gender of your child. And I think that, let me say this, I think I'm well suited to be a boy mom. I think that that goes with my, like, how I operate. I'm kind of not super put together, and I can't even imagine fixing little girls' hair every day. And we're kind of just like all over the place. But I will say with this 4th one, I kind of had this just like thought in my head. I thought, you know what? I feel like this really could be a girl. And I just thought how much it would change the dynamic of our household. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have my heart set on it or anything like that. Okay. And I think that having 4 boys, I think that it makes a lot more sense for me and my husband than having 4 girls. Now, we would probably say the opposite if we had 4 girls. Yeah. But yeah, when I took that video, and it's funny because my youngest, he said he was team boy, or my middle guy. My youngest couldn't talk yet. He's like 1. Lewis, my middle guy, said he was team boy, and Marshall said he was team girl. And so in the video, you see Marshall like crying because he found out that it was a boy. So I was soothing him, but we came to find out later that he was actually just upset that he was wrong, not that it was actually a boy. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure that was the case. Definitely. He just didn't want to be wrong. Yeah. But I will say, when I read it, I was like, oh, really? Because I really thought this might be a girl. Either way, I think it's going to be so fun to have 4 of the same gender, or it would have been so fun to have 3 boys and one little girl. Yeah. Well, you can write a book someday about for like the ultimate mum guide to boy mom. Yeah. Yeah. So what about, let's talk about the pregnancies and even just the running aspect of the pregnancies. Now that you are essentially an expert in being a pregnant mum who is a runner, how is it different each time? For someone listening who is maybe thinking about getting pregnant or is pregnant, and it's so easy to see social media and think, well, how are they doing this? How are they doing that? Is it that you are, I'm just lucky that I am a mother who can run through pregnancies, or does it really differ each time? So this pregnancy has been a lot different than my first 3. I've had a fairly easy pregnancy, I would say, but I have felt much more tired and run down. And I think that 2 things go into that. 1, having 3 little kids, but 2, I'm just a little bit older, Mm-hmm. So you do see a difference because of the age thing as well? I think so. I mean, so I was almost 29 when I had my first, and I'm going to be almost 35 when I have this one. And I did run through my whole pregnancy with my other 3. I will say that my first 2, I probably ran the most. And this time I'm 35 weeks pregnant, and I have not ran in 4 weeks. Oh. So that's, that was 31 weeks that I kind of stopped. We had a race here in town. It's called the Monumental Mile, and I love it. And I said, I'm doing that Monumental Mile. And I ran it as hard as I could, 31 weeks pregnant. And it was so fun. It's also really hot and really hard. But since then, I'm just like, I don't want to run. It doesn't feel good. I have a lot of pressure on my lower area. And I just it's so hot. So I just made the decision that if I don't want to do it this time, I don't need to feel like I need to run through the end of my pregnancy just because I can. Mm-hmm. So what would your advice be to other pregnant women who are out there, trying to run, maybe like you, they said they feel a bit of pressure, obviously on their body, not on their personality. Yeah. But then maybe they do also feel pressure from, other people saying, oh, I gave birth yesterday and I ran that day, or something like. How do people find that balance? What would your advice be? Well, I will say with my first, I don't know that I felt pressure. I didn't feel outside pressure to run through my pregnancy because that was 6 years ago, and I definitely wasn't nearly as actively involved in social media as I am now. I actually didn't have Instagram yet or anything like that, so I didn't feel outside pressure, but I think that with my first pregnancy, I kind of wanted to prove to myself that I could run and that it was something new. It was a new adventure. It was a new challenge. And so I wanted to run through my pregnancy. And I don't think there was anything wrong with that at all. This time around, I'm kind of like, well, I've been there, done that, and I don't want to do it right now, so I'm not going to. But as far as like the recovery goes, when you're saying if someone starts running like, right after they give birth, I just think it's silly. I mean, honestly, it's just your body just went through something very, for lack of a better term, traumatic, and you need to rest it and let it recover. And also, you're only going to have a newborn baby this one time. I mean, you might have multiple kids, but like this baby's only going to be this small and you're only going to be this tired and crazy and, hormonally feeling crazy for such a short period of time, even though it feels like an eternity, new moms. I know it does. Why add that into your life? I mean, go for walks. That's great. Like go do stuff, but you don't need to start running or doing anything like that right away.
So what about someone who says, okay, but I have a lot of anxiety or I really need it for me? Like, and I know you're not by any means expert on this, but I was kind of adamant from the start that I wasn't going to run until A, when the doctors had cleared me, and B, I think I started running 5.5 weeks or something like that, which was still before the recommended. But,
6 weeks, yeah.
For me, it wasn't so much about getting out there. But what would you say getting out there away from her? It was just kind of because I wanted to run. What would you say for someone who says, yeah, but I kind of need it. I need it for me.
I get that. Yeah, because you do start feeling a little stir crazy. And I would say go for walks. Find things like meditation, find things that do help you feel better. I mean, walking is exercise, right? I just think that your body is not ready for all that jostling and moving around before that 6 week or 5 week mark, whatever. Everybody's a little bit different. But I get the mental side of things. And I'm telling you right now, I'm going through it right now because I am not giving myself that outlet because it doesn't feel good. And I'm struggling a little bit because it's hard to not have what you're used to having to make you feel better. I mean, my husband comes back from runs at 6 a.m. and he flies through the door and he's like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like grumpy, getting up, dealing with the kids. And I'm thinking, must be nice to have all those endorphins flowing through your body right now, you know?
Yep.
So I think you just have to find other outlets to ease those feelings and to make you feel better. And you have to actively search for it. They just don't fall into your lap.
No, I think that's good advice. And finding a group of maybe some women that you can go talk to. I know for me, particularly when I had my injury returning to running postpartum, obviously running became a source of kind of frustration. So, finding another mother who I could kind of meet up with and walk and talk with. And particularly for me, finding a woman who was not a runner was nice because it didn't come up as like, how's your running going or things like that. She couldn't care less whether I ran or not. So I would say that was another good thing. And I just wanted to hear your opinion on that as you have been through it so many times. And, like you mentioned, you're only really going to get it once. You might get it other times, but you're never going to get that stillness, that quietness that you get with one without other kids running around. So then, as you return to running, you, a year after Russell, you ran a PR at the Indy Monumental, actually ran past me when I was standing on the road pregnant.
You.
Yeah,
yes,
you and Glenn.
Love that.
Yeah. So that was really cool for me to see you out there running and like you were kicking butt and, you did run a PR and,
I forgot about that. You were like mile 22, weren't you? Or 21, something like that. Did you see me first or did I see you first?
I definitely saw you first.
Okay. I was so
I was looking out for you.
Yeah. And you kind of knew that probably the time frame that I'd come through. Oh, yeah, that was so fun.
Yeah. So that was quite a special moment for me. And especially for me seeing, I don't know how pregnant I was, I guess 6 months.
You were definitely pregnant, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely obvious. But me standing there and then seeing you on the side of the road, knowing that you had, given birth to Russell a year before. And so what would you say for women? This is the final thing we'll kind of ask about, mother runners who, are thinking they're coming back on their journey and they're thinking, oh, my best days behind me, can I ever come back to running? But you've managed to get 4 kids and run a PR or three kids and one almost here, probably here by the time this goes out. And
better be.
well, yeah, I'm thinking actually I might let this go a little bit early now that I might shuffle some things around thinking about it, because I don't want to be like that baby far. Talk. Yeah. Well, and also if you've had the baby like 4 weeks ago, then there might be. But anyway, yes. So for someone listening who maybe thinks, how am I ever going to get back? But, you know, for me, seeing you there, knowing that you ran a PR, that was cool. What would you say to women who think they are maybe never going to get back, or even someone listening who has had a big injury that took them out for quite a long time? What would be your advice, or what would you say about it being possible?
Well, I think that there's so many moms who run that have proven it time and time again that after the kids are born, you can get back to being faster. I mean, Tia Stone, she's one that rings in my head. She's Arkansas Running Mom is her name. Mm-hmm. Laura Anderson, she just ran a huge PR post baby. Mm-hmm. And you know, I ran my fastest marathon at the time after my first, and then between my second and third, I wasn't able to run a marathon because I did get injured pretty badly. I tore my plantar fascia, and it was disheartening. Like, I was training, you know, I wanted to get that next PR between the two babies, and it didn't happen. I had to literally take 12 weeks off where I couldn't run at all because I couldn't put pressure on my foot. And I think that we get in our heads and we think, oh my gosh, time's slipping away. I'm getting old. And, you know, but that's all relative. You know what I mean? It's like, I have spent so much of my time from age 29 to 35 having babies. Mm-hmm. And so I haven't had all these opportunities to build season upon season, and that's okay. But maybe my fastest times will be in my late 30s rather than early 30s. So I think that my advice to people would be that you don't have to think, oh, I'm a certain age, I need to get it done now, because you might be 43 or 45 mm-hmm. and the fittest you've ever been. And that's in your timeline and the way you've done your life. That's where it works out. So I just think that we need to not focus so much on timelines and just have patience. And, you know, maybe you see a friend who ran a PR 7 months postpartum, but maybe it's taking you 18 months to get back to where you were. And that's totally okay. And actually a slower build is going to be better for not getting injured in the first place, you know?
For sure. So would you say any of those injuries, the plantar fasciitis or anything else, was that due to trying to come back too fast?
Well, let's see. Lewis was like 8 months. I don't know, because I think that I actually was pretty slowly building after him compared to my first. I built way too fast after my first one. But I think that was just lucky that I didn't get injured because I was young and healthy and my body was just agreeing with everything. I think when I tore my plantar fascia, I could have taken 6 weeks off and let myself heal up a little bit. Plantar fasciitis is tough though, because man, that's a nagging injury. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It is hard to get rid of, even if you take 6 weeks off.
Yeah. Okay. So that could have been it either.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But the other thing I was going to say related to what you said there just a few minutes ago is you said about, you know, some people can be back running a PR 7 months. Some people it might take, you know, a year or longer or even more. But I think the problem is with social media, we tend to like suction onto that 7 month woman or the 5 month woman or someone who for some reason like triggers us, and we just can't let go of. It's kind of like the same thing that we often hear that we don't take compliments very well. We just kind of deflect compliments, but we're constantly getting compliments. But then what you're focusing on is the one negative thing you might hear very rarely, but all you can think about is that. And it's the same kind of thing with, I think, social media and coming back from injuries, coming back from pregnancy. All you can focus on is the person who was the exception to the rule. And you think maybe I'm going to be one of those exceptions, but often the case it isn't. And I think it's good to hear you say that, you know, it's okay not to be the exception. It's okay that most people out there are probably struggling, but they don't want to post it on social media because all they have in their head is that person who managed to get back quickly. So I think that's something we all just need to keep in mind. Anything else you would say for women who are coming back from a pregnancy or, starting to try and run again after having a baby, just before we go on?
Yeah, I would just say that we're all unique, and you might see that person ramping up their miles. And you know what? Maybe that's fine for that person. Maybe they're not injury prone. Maybe their body handles it well. Maybe their body handled pregnancy really well, and they're coming back and they feel great. And they're working with someone that's telling them that's fine and their body's doing well. But I just think that you have to focus on your own life and not compare. And, I personally, when I'm like 4 or 5 months postpartum and I see people ramping up their miles really high, which is something that I did after my first baby, I'm thinking, I don't know why the heck she wants to get out of bed at 5 a.m. because I want to sleep if my baby's sleeping, So I think I know this is cliche to say, but like, just do you, and just, you
can hear
smiling. Yeah. Do you know how many babies I have had in the background of my podcast?
I need to get myself some noise cancelling headphones, because every time I hear it, like makes me kind of stop thinking of what I was thinking about. Anyway,
I know. But yeah, I just say do you, and just if that's 3 years postpartum, you know what? I feel like once your youngest gets to be about 3, I mean, Glenn and I always say, if Marshall and Lewis, if those are the only 2 kids we had right now, we'd be like kind of cruising just a little bit, because you're not chasing a toddler around anymore, or worrying about sleep stuff. So yeah, I would just say do you, and don't feel like you have to be on any certain timeline. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's helpful. Okay, so let's talk about what you do. In addition to chasing around lots of kids, you do host your own podcast. I'll have another. So for anyone who somehow does not know what it is, tell us about what your podcast is all about. Well, my podcast, I'll have another. I came up with that name. Actually, my sister did, just because I was like, what would I like to have another of? And so I just thought, another glass of wine, another conversation, another mile to run, whatever it may be. And as time has gone on, it has evolved into a more running focused podcast. I've always interviewed lots of runners, but it has definitely become more runner heavy. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think that the focus, it can be less running focused than some of these other running podcasts you hear out there. I tend to, you agree? I would agree to it. Yeah. Yeah, we tend to talk about other life stuff, and I sprinkle in parts of my life in the show as well. Sometimes I interview entrepreneurs that have nothing to do with running at all, and we don't even talk about running. But it's just a place for casual conversations, and I always want to interview people that inspire me and hopefully inspire the people that are listening. Yeah, and I think it's great. One thing about Lindsay's podcast is it's literally reminds me as if you were sitting in a coffee shop or maybe a wine bar in the evening, and you're literally eavesdropping on someone's conversation. That's kind of how it feels to me, like you're just eavesdropping on someone else. So I love listening to it, and you've done a great job. You've, really kind of taken off with the people you've been able to get. And, I thought maybe we could spend the second half of this kind of focusing on something a bit different. Everyone wants to grow their social medias, no matter whether you've got 50 followers or 50,000 followers, everyone wants more people to kind of watch. And, even though we shouldn't lean on it, it's always good to feel the likes and the comments and the appreciation. So I thought we'd focus on social media and kind of a podcast if someone has been thinking about it. So, what gave you the confidence to take the leap to start a podcast in the first place? Well, I was listening to podcasts, and I really wanted this specific show to listen to, and I couldn't find it. And so I love talking to people. I love hearing people's stories. And it's one of those things where I would be out on runs all the time. You get all your big ideas when you're out on runs, and you think, oh, these things I'm going to do. And then you get back from your run and you're like, okay, now I'm going to do, and you kind of move on from it. But I would always come back from my runs like super fired up about it and talking my husband's ear off about it. And finally I just said, I'm just going to launch it and just see what happens. And I wanted to hear from runners and athletes and entrepreneurs and just people that were out there doing cool stuff that I wanted to share, with people who might want to listen. And at the time, I had a very small social media following. I mean, I had the opportunity to be on the cover of Women's Running magazine because I won a freaking contest, not because I was anything, not because I was any fast runner.
You mean you went walking along the street and they went, you?
You're the one. We want you on this issue. But I think that kind of helped a little bit because people kind of knew who I was from if they, subscribed to that magazine. But I mean, it was very small. So I don't think I was a very well-known person to start a podcast. So I didn't really know, will this thing get picked up? I don't want to put all this work in and nobody listen. And you were one of my very first guests.
Mm-hmm. I think
you were episode 6 or something.
6. Yeah, I was going to say 4, but somewhere around there. Yeah, it was first. I don't want to say top 10, first 10.
You might have been 4 or 5, but yeah. So I just, the hardest part for me was figuring out all the technical stuff, the conversations that I've learned a lot, over the past 2 years, but the conversation side of things, I would kind of prep, but not nearly as much as I prep now. But my intentions were, I want to have a conversation with this person and just share it with the world.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much what you did. And you've still got that to this day. And obviously your voice has developed. And, on the note of that, for someone who says, okay, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, I'd love to do that. I have something like you just said, I have the podcast I want to listen to, but it doesn't exist. I want to create my own. There's cool apps like Anchor now, which allow you to do it very easily for someone who does want to do it. But how would you say, what would be your advice to someone for not, it's very nerve-wracking to talk to, if you're going to do a solo episode, that is incredibly scary. But even if you're going to interview people, especially if it's people you look up to, how do you kind of not let your nerves get the most of you? And I remember if I listened to my first episode, which happened to be Dave McGillivray, which is just cringe to me that he was my first episode, and I'm just so embarrassed of how bad it was. What would be your advice for someone if they are thinking about doing it, to kind of make sure they can kind of jump in feeling good about what they just did?
Yeah, you say Dave was one of your first. He was your first. One of my first famous runners, for lack of a better term, was Sarah Hall. And I remember being really nervous about that as well. But I would just say, you just have to look at this person as they're a human being and just talk to them like they are your friend. Mm-hmm. Because if you're feeling nervous, that person can probably sense that. And it's probably going to put them on edge a little bit too. I don't really get nervous at all anymore. The only thing I would say I would get nervous about is if I want to bring something up that it might be controversial or something. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I want to make sure I cover this topic and I don't want to offend anybody. And I want them to feel comfortable with me. I don't want them to feel like they're going in for some news interview and they're going to get these crazy questions. I want them to feel comfortable with me, but I also want to share what people want to hear. I mean, I really, when I record my show, I'm like, what do my listeners want to hear?
Mm-hmm. I think that's good advice. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I was listening to this podcast, what questions would I want to know about this person? And so when I develop questions, I think about that a lot and I'll bounce them off my husband's head. Sometimes I'm like, I think people will really like this question. Don't you?
Does Glenn often go, yeah, that's great. Cause that's what Steve does to me when I ask him things. He's like,
It depends on who I'm interviewing. Like some people he takes more interest in than others. Or sometimes he'll be like, oh yeah, the chicks will eat that up. Like, oh, they'll love that question. But then, Glenn oftentimes will suggest guests. I mean, recently I interviewed ultra runner Jim Walmsley.
Mm-hmm. Who just won Western States.
Yeah. And to be completely honest, I had never heard his name until Glenn said, you should interview Jim Walmsley. And then he won Western States like 3 weeks after his episode, which went out, which was so cool. But an interview like that, I get ideas from Glenn for sure. Because an interview like that, I'm picking up some more male listeners and maybe a different demographic than I was serving like right from the start. And I think his advice is really valuable. Mm-hmm. Like, what would you want to hear if you saw this random girls podcast, but you wanted to hear from Jim Walmsley, Yeah,
no, I think that's good advice. And I think A lot of the things you just said there can be used if someone listening is wanting to maybe start your own. So you think about what your listener would want. What do you want to know? That's probably what they want to know as well. And then, asking other people who may have, some advice, maybe bouncing some questions off them. And then for me personally, I think the biggest thing that you need to keep in mind is to be yourself. I remember when I first started out, I was listening to podcasts from business podcasts from like Amy Porterfield was the one that sticks to mind.
Oh yeah, I listen to her sometimes.
So I would often like try and be like Amy and be like, oh, Amy's really popular. This is how I've got to sound. Or maybe someone listening is thinking, I really like the way Lindsay hosts her podcast or Tina hosts her podcast. Maybe I'll do it like that. But if you do it like that, it ends up being kind of more like a script because you're trying to essentially act your way through your podcast, whereas you want it to be just like you said, like you having a conversation with someone. So would you agree with that is important? And did you find that you tried to copy people, or were you straight away able to just kind of be who you are and kind of have your own personality to it from the start?
Well, I always like to give credit where credit is due. And the idea for my podcast came up from the Happy Hour with Jamie Ivey, which is a faith-based podcast, but I loved her style. And I was religiously listening to her show. And though my podcast does not cover topics like hers, it's very similar in the conversation style. And so I wouldn't say I copied her by any means, but I will say that I looked up to her and I saw her as a mentor. And when I launched my show, I was like, I like how she does this. And I think that that's really important if you're starting a show, is to listen to different types of shows and say, what do I like about this show? What do I not like about this show? And also maybe check out a show. I just interviewed Mario Fraioli a few weeks ago, and his episode just went out. And he said this to me, like, go back to like Rich Roll's very first podcast episode and then listen to his, most recent one and see how has he evolved? What has he changed? And I think that's just research, though. I mean, you don't have to go to school for podcasting or any of these things, but you can school yourself, Yeah,
no, definitely. And what about downloads? Like, for someone who's starting out, the same thing with anyone who started a blog or you decided that you want to grow your social media following. It can be very difficult to kind of watch this slow growth and think, well, is this even worth it? Especially with something like a podcast where you're putting a lot of time and effort into it. What would be your advice for someone when it comes to looking at downloads and looking at the people who are listening?
Well, I would say that it's just like the blogging world was, 5 years ago. Don't start a podcast to think I'm starting this podcast to make money and have it become my job, because look, there's a really long road ahead before any of that starts happening. And if you're going to start a passion project like this, you need to start it because you are passionate about the topic and you're passionate about getting out to the ears of listeners and people want to hear what you're talking about. I feel like Amy Porterfield might be one of them, but I feel like I've listened to a lot of podcasts. Goal Digger is another one with Jenna Kutcher, where they talk about you can't just start something and think this is going to be a side hustle moneymaker right from the start. You have to just hone in on your passion and your craft and then go from there. And certainly, just like we were talking with social media with the moms, postpartum coming back from baby, don't compare yourself to my podcast or Tina's podcast or someone who's been doing it for years, because guess what? Like your first 5 episodes, unless you're a very famous person who just has a big name that people are going to download, you're probably not going to have like thousands upon thousands of downloads right from the start, because it takes some time to build an audience. People want to like get to know you a little bit and see if they like your style and like what you stand for and the kind of guests you have on your show.
No, I think that's very important. So even if you do get, let's say 5, maybe 10 downloads in your first few episodes, don't take it to heart. Don't take it as, oh, I shouldn't bother with this, because at the end of the day, it's essentially like running, isn't it? Where you're doing it for you. If you're doing it for an audience, obviously you want to be thinking about what they would want to know. But if you're doing it to get recognition, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Yes. You should be doing it for yourself because you enjoy talking about this topic. You enjoy learning from some maybe experts in the field or other people who have that same interest as you. And it should be fun. The actual recording of it should be the fun part for you, not the looking at the numbers afterwards. The same as, sharing a social media post. The fun part should be the moment you are in it, not looking at the photo afterwards and seeing how many likes you got. If you're taking a picture to put it on social media when in the moment you were hating it, what was the point really? Because it should be all about being in that moment. And actually on that note, we'll save that for a bit later. I'm going to just jump around a little bit here. Okay. Keep going with the podcast here. What is your favorite part on that note of being a podcaster and, getting to do these interviews?
Definitely the people, getting to know the people that I interview, and then connecting with my listeners. I love connecting with my listeners. When we were talking about that, I was just thinking, okay, when you look at your downloads, for instance, imagine yourself talking to all of those people in person, like one person, two people, three people, and the numbers go up. Imagine if you were in a room with all of those people. I mean, it's a really special feeling to know that these people are listening to my voice and listening to this passion project, this work that I'm putting out every single week. And so I would just say 100%, my very favorite part is the people and the connections. And, like when I get an email or an Instagram message or whatever, and it's just like, it's my favorite part of the week, or when someone's like, you make me feel less alone because I'm also home with my kids and like, I feel a little bit crazy today, or, I just ran my marathon PR. Thank you so much for providing this content for me to listen to on my long runs. That's why I'm doing it, because it's just, and I've met so many amazing people, and the people that I interview, like after I interviewed you, for instance, like I feel like I become much closer to them because I get to know them on a different level.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, would you say that let's say some of the famous people, for someone listening who thinks, okay, you've interviewed like Desi Linden, you've interviewed a few times people like Molly Ludlow, you got plenty of other big names behind your podcast, Jim Walmsley. Do you stay in touch with these people, or would you say some of them you kind of might never really talk to again, but if you reached out to them, they might reply, or what's the situation?
Yeah, I don't think that all of them would. I mean, Dina Castor's a good example. I've been able to interview her 3 times now, and she's always like, hey, Lindsay, so great to talk to you. And I truly think that Dina Castor would remember me and knows who I am at this point, because we've interviewed so many times. But I do think there are some people that I've interviewed, especially in the past, that probably don't remember me or, whatever. But then sometimes you have the professional runners and they'll start following you on Instagram and liking your posts, and you're like, oh, Emily Enfield, hey, you know what I'm up to today, that kind of stuff. And I think that it depends on age too. I really see those Bowerman Track Club girls, for instance, the younger generation, they're just so much into social media, more so than even people in their 30s. And I think they pay attention more. And a lot of those girls, I mean, Colleen Quigley is a great example. She's working that social media game. You know what I mean? Because she sees this professional running career, but she sees the other side of it too, the other business side of it too. So I think people like that stay a little bit more active. And also those younger girls, I think they might be more apt to actually listening to podcasts.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very true. I once had a message from Jordan Hesse saying she was listening to my podcast when she was injured, which was a pretty cool moment. Although since then I haven't seen anything from her, so I wonder if that was just a time to get her through a rough moment. But it's still pretty cool to even think about.
Yes,
again, that comes back to what you said earlier about talk to them like they're people, because they are and that's what I always have been trying to say, even though I'm not, at the level I was now, people see it more and they believe it more. But even when I was there, I was still saying, I'm just a person. And the same with them, they're just people. They have to listen to something. They get bored on their run. They get bored while they're cross training. So, they have to listen to something. So bringing that realness down and reminding them that they are real.
And on that note too, I've got no problem reaching out to someone with a big name like 10, 11, 12, 13 times until they respond if I really want an interview, because it doesn't matter. I mean, I might seem like an annoying person because I've reached out a ton of times to get someone on my show, but like, I really don't have any shame with that. I view it at this point, especially like this is my job and I want to get your name on my show because I think you're interesting. And most importantly, like I said earlier, my listeners want to hear from you.
Yeah.
So I will reach out to you. I will call your agent. I will do whatever it takes to get you in the ears of my listeners because they're going to be excited to hear from you.
Mm-hmm. So what would be your advice for someone who, even if it's running or even if it's not, getting guests on the show?
Just shamelessly reach out. I mean, some people are really hard. For instance, Kellen Taylor, I had tried to get her on the show for a long time. And I don't think she has a website. So, she's on the NAS Elite website, but if people don't have like a personal website where you can fill out a contact form, that's tough. And when you fill out contact forms, you're really kind of like, where's this going?
Yeah, shot in the dark. Yeah.
Who's seeing this? But I've booked Kellen from Instagram, like reaching out on Instagram. Like someone's like, you should have Kellen on your show. And I'm like, yes, I've tried a couple times. Kellen, what do you think? And so it's just that persistency. Like for me to think when I responded to that to say, yes, I've tried a couple times. I still want to have Ron. I could have shied away and been like, I've already tried. She, obviously isn't interested. I don't care. And come to find out she's really shy and she just doesn't really like to do the media stuff. But she agreed to come on. So, and you just have to think too, like these people are humans. Like picture if someone emailed you 5 times to ask you to come on their show, you wouldn't be annoyed with that person. You're probably just forgetting and moving on with your day and being like, oh yeah, I'll get back to her. And you're just not thinking about it. Yeah.
As long as I think the key here is you write a genuine individualized email.
Yes.
You cannot send, hi, I saw you on blah, blah, blah. I would love to have you on my show because it has to be an individualized email. You have to prove that you have learned and loved and followed that person for a while, not that you've just decided, hey, they've got a lot of followers, I need a lot of followers. Like, it has to be genuine.
Not to mention when people pitch to come on your show and it's like their PR person copy and pasting like this pitch email that they've probably sent to Tina and Allie and every other running podcast out there. And it's like, okay, I don't think you've ever even listened to my show. And
especially when they talk about the most recent episode that you did. I really loved your last interview with insert.
Like, did you know? What did we talk about? Do you even know what this person does?
Yeah.
And there are a couple times that PR people have reached out to me that I have booked the person because I'm genuinely interested in that person. But it's a little bit tacky when you can tell that there's no substance and they've literally copy and pasted that to 50 people.
Definitely. And one other thing I will add for someone, if you are going to launch a podcast, start with, I've heard the magic number is 7 episodes. I think it's most podcasts don't last beyond 7 episodes. So I would say,
true?
If you start, I read that somewhere a few years ago. If you make it beyond 7, you're probably okay. So I would start with 7. Don't expect to get big guests at first. Maybe get a local runner, get people that you know, and then kind of build from there. You're never going to be able to attract someone at the very top level when you're just launching out, because for them, they're thinking about their time investment here. It's going to come down to selfish reasons. Are they going to get something out of it as well? So keep that in mind.
Yeah. And I think I launched with 4 episodes, and the other key there, and if you research podcasts at all, you'll hear this, is just be consistent. If you say your show's coming out on Wednesday, do not miss a Wednesday.
Yep.
The one time I had an issue with that was when my mother-in-law passed away. And I remember I was like, I cannot burden my family right now with figuring out what episode to put out in this week. And what I did was I re-released an old episode with Molly Ludlow, who was like my second guest. And then the following week, I put out an updated episode with her. So you can get creative, especially if you have a little bit of a backlog, and re-release an old episode or just something like that. But yeah, if your listeners are expecting to hear your voice every Friday, you better put something out every Friday. And if you don't have a guest, well, get yourself a 20-minute solo episode and put something out, you know?
Yeah, no, very good advice there. Okay, let's talk about logistics with this. Okay, how do you do it with 3 kids? You know, I'm about to have a 4th. How does this work for you being at home? Well, I know the answer, but people don't.
If people have been listening for a while, they've probably, hopefully, seen that my quality has gotten a lot better as far as sound, especially. And, you know, I used to record in my dining room while my kids were napping, and it was a little bit more reckless, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say, did that not make you really nervous that they were going to wake up?
Well, maybe this makes me a bad mom, but if I was like 20, 30 minutes into an episode and they were waking up in their crib crying, I'd be like, oh, they can just cry it out for a little bit. They'll be fine. I do remember after Russell was born, though, my youngest, literally recording an episode holding him.
Wow.
Which I would never do now. I mean, I might if I was recording an episode with a close friend who I could be like, hey, hang on a second, I need 10 minutes, you know, but like I would never do that with someone I didn't really know very well.
That's brave.
Yeah. I think that's also comes with the territory of having 3 kids. Mm-hmm. Like I would have never done it with my first baby, you know, and I wouldn't do that now. But as time has gone on and I've been fortunate enough to get some sponsors on my show and also have a Patreon page where people support the show. I've had the opportunity to hire a babysitter twice a week, and I also have a co-working space now. So I am able to come dedicate time and energy to this that I didn't have before. And like right now I'm sitting in a sound booth. That's why, Tina, I'm in the dark right now. Mm-hmm. You can hardly see me. But yeah, so I have the opportunity to pay for a babysitter, and this has become, it's a part-time job. It's not a full-time job for sure. Would I love for the podcast and everything I'm doing, like to speak more, have more opportunities like that to become more full-time? Yes, I would love that. But right now it's very part-time. And I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the 2 days a week that I have a babysitter and I can come work and dedicate time and energy to researching my interviews and putting out good audio for my listeners. But it wasn't always like that.
Mm-hmm. I could definitely see that being kind of a learning curve with, understanding how this was going to fit into your life with the kids. It sounds like you've kind of got it down, which is pretty cool to hear, and well done for that part. One final question to kind of wrap up with the podcast questions. What do you tell your family and friends that you do? I'm just curious to hear this.
It's so funny because some people get it. My sisters, my older sister, she got it from day one. You know, some people very much get it. I remember when I wanted to launch the podcast, I told my dad about it and he's like, well, why would you want to do that? And I really, not to go back on what I said earlier, don't start a podcast, don't start a blog for the money, but I really saw this as something that could eventually be somewhat of a career for me. And I believed in myself enough that I thought that it could be. And I think that's really important. You have to believe in yourself, because if you can't belittle yourself. You can't think, well, I'm going to start a podcast, but it's just going to be this. You have to go into it with the passion first and foremost. But if you do want to turn it into something, you got to believe that you can do it. So yeah, I say a lot of times, anywhere I am, actually, I was just at the bank this past weekend, opening a bank account for my son, Marshall. And the guy's like, okay, so what do you do? Do you stay home? And I'm like, oh, I host a podcast. And a lot of times people follow that up with, oh, cool. Or, oh, do you make money? Like they don't get that it actually can be a job.
Yeah.
And then for instance, like my in-laws, I like my sisters-in-law. I think they think I have a hobby where I like to talk about running.
Oh yeah.
So some people totally get it. And especially listeners of podcasts get it. But if you're not in that scene at all, they just think it's a hobby.
Yeah, no, and that's why I was interested to hear what you say, because
you have that too.
And I swear, my family, even my mum, dad, and sister, they still like if someone asked them what I do, in addition to like the running that I did before, they'd be like, "Yeah, she like blogs and does a podcast and stuff. I'm like,
yeah,
well, I do a whole lot more than blogs, thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah.
People call me a blogger sometimes. I had someone have that in my description for something that they were talking about me, and I was like, can you change that to podcaster? Like, that's okay if you're a blogger, but I'm not a blogger. I don't write blogs. I podcast.
Yeah. Well, and it's, and it's just the kind of eye roll that people give as to like, really, that's what you do. Like, so yeah, that's why I was curious to hear what you said, because any of that stuff, even people who are bloggers who make a lot of money from their work, people still are like, that's all you do, and it's like they're probably making more than you are. Like,
oh, totally.
So
yeah, like a huge blog that gets millions of views. Oh yeah, that people don't realize that is a full-time job.
Yeah. So I wanted to hear what you would say to that. Okay, just to wrap up, what are if you could give us 3 things you have learned from fellow podcast guests that really sank in with you, what would it be?
I recently interviewed Jessica Hoffheimer on my Patreon page for a follow-up interview, and the end of our conversation really resonated with me, and she was saying to be your whole self.
Love that.
On social media. Because you might notice sometimes if you're into like the whole Instagram thing or whatever, you post a picture of like your kids or something, and it might not get as much engagement, as a picture of you where you set your camera up and you run by.
Yes.
But you know what? Like, just because some people don't care about that, like, that's your whole self. That is your whole life. And if you're getting obsessed with these little nitty gritty things, you're not presenting who you fully are. So, and she was talking about that in regards to, she's selling Beauty Counter now, and she really loves it, but she was hesitant at first to put it out there because she didn't know what people would think. And she just kind of come to the revolution that just, this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is what I love. So I'm going to be my whole self.
I love that. And Jess's Instagram handle is Pace of Me.
Pace of Me. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right. She's a great one.
Yeah. And that's a really, really good point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that is so true. And everyone feels that on every level. It doesn't matter if someone has 300,000 followers. If they put up a picture of their kids, it might only get 3,000, which to them.
And people will unfollow you too, because they're like, why did I follow that person? And why is she posting a picture of her kids?
Exactly. So I think that's a great one. Thank you for sharing that one. All right. What else?
Okay. I'm trying to think. Oh, Dina Castor, hands down. I mean, anybody who's listened to her episodes on my show, she was 88 and 100 and something.
Not years old.
Not years old. No, episode. But she, and I probably sound like a broken record, but she came onto the show. I put her episode out the Friday before the New York City Marathon and Monumental Marathon on the weekend. And she had so many positive mental pointers for people racing. And one of them was the define yourself thing. And I think I wrote this on my arm for my marathon that I ran that fall, and really thought about it in moments of despair in races when you feel like, I can't take one more step. This is so painful. And she just kind of said, that's the moment when I say, like, I'm going to define myself right now. Like, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do this thing, So, man, if anybody listening hasn't listened to that episode with Dina Castor, definitely check it out. It's hands down in my top 5.
Okay. I will put links in the show notes for all of the ones we've mentioned. Anyway.
Okay. Well, now I have one more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me think. Well, on the flip side of define yourself, I can't remember who it was recently. It might have been Jackie Merritt. She's an ultra runner. I just can't remember which episode it was, but it might have been Kellen Taylor. But I recently had a guest that said, running doesn't define me. So it's kind of the opposite of what Dean said, but it rings so true to me because it doesn't define you. And guess what, people? Like, there might be a day when you can't run anymore. There might be a day when you're injured for like 6 months. So if you let anything in your life define who you are, whether that's running or anything you do, it's a slippery slope, because you can really get into a deep depression if that thing gets pulled out from underneath you.
Absolutely.
So when you're in a hard moment in a workout or a race, sure, go on and define yourself and make that moment really important, because it is important to you. It might not be important to the rest of the world, but it's important to you. So define yourself and make it important. But at the end of the day, don't let one specific passion define who you are.
Yes, love that. That is good advice. Well, I'm sure by the time we get this out, you'll have told me which one that was, and I'll put a link in the show notes to listen to that episode as well.
Yeah, this is just you asking that question and me pulling these out just off the top of my head just makes me realize even now how much more I love talking to people and getting little bits of inspiration and advice from the people I talk to.
I know it is one of the best things for sure. All right, we're just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Have you thought about getting yourself a pair of Hoka One One shoes yet? Come on, you're tempted, aren't you? I was wondering what all the fuss was about, and now I get it. I am enjoying them so much that the Clifton 5 have become my new favourite shoe, with their marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight that will keep you comfortable throughout the day. Many of the best professional runners out there right now are wearing them for everything from training to workouts. I even think you could race in them. They are that comfortable and light, and if they're good enough for the best out there, they're definitely good enough for us. It is the sweetest cushion, fine-tuned with new overlays and a sleek design. You can get yours today by visiting hokaoneone.com/runningforreal. That's spelled HOKAONEONE.com/runningforreal with the number 4, and you can use coupon code runningforreal, again with the number 4, for free expedited shipping to become part of the family. It's time to fly. This episode of the Running for Real podcast is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv provides audio-based workouts created by certified personal trainers available through a mobile app. What does that mean you get? Well, access to expert trainers, a flexible audio workout format so you can work out the way you like, and I've told you over and over again how important it is to listen to your body. The Aptiv trainers have a wide array of personalities so you can find the personal training style that motivates you. You know I love the gentle, be kind to yourself approach, but maybe that doesn't work for you. What is even cooler is that Aptiv's in-house music production team creates music playlists that are perfectly timed to the intensity and pace of your training. When you need a boost, the music keeps you going. When you need to back off, the music dials back with you. Aptiv also has a 5K, 10K, half and full marathon training program. And for future mamas out there, there's a full maternity program broken down by trimester so you can work out and build strength for a healthy pregnancy. Pretty cool, huh? Subscriptions start at $14.99 billed monthly or $99.99 for an annual membership, but for a limited time, new members get 30% off an annual membership by visiting aptiv.com/runningforreal. That's AAPTIV.com/runningforreal with the number 4. All right, Lindsay, I mentioned this to you before we started that I'm going to change up one of my questions. Being the nutrition tip, I am going to pull out and test out something on you. Okay. As this is Running for Real, I want you to maybe give me an example of a moment where you put a picture on social media and it wasn't quite what it seemed. So something you put up didn't maybe show the full story of what had happened, maybe before that, maybe after it, or maybe during it. Can you give us an example?
First of all, let me say, I don't know if pride's the right word, but I kind of pride myself on putting it all out there and not putting anything really fake out to the world. I like to talk about the hard days and the good days, the hard workouts and the great workouts and the workouts that didn't go so well or the races that went well but didn't go well, without coming off as complaining about my life, you know, because I'm so thankful for how great of a life I have, but I do think I put it out there. I don't know. This one picture I posted on June 21st on Instagram, and it's a cute picture of my big belly bump and my 3 kids in the bathtub. And I said 33 weeks pregnant. Right before this bath and picture, I got body slammed by the one in the middle. That's all I got. Okay. So that, I feel like that says I'm putting it out there, but like I did get body slammed by him and it actually hurt really bad. And I was nervous for like 2 hours that like something happened to the baby because Lewis, my middle guy, literally body slammed me and I had a bruise on my belly, you know? Talk about being a boy mom, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's very real as well, because, the worrying about it part is something you're never really going to say. Yeah, exactly. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Yeah. What about a running for real moment?
Okay, a running for real moment. I think I have running for real moments. Well, okay, here's a recent running for real moment. About a couple weeks before the monumental mile, so I was like 27 weeks pregnant. Glenn got home from work and I said, I'm just going to go for a run. I'm going to run 30 minutes just because it'll make me feel better. And I just started running. I think I got a minute in and I just stopped because I was like, this is terrible. I don't feel good. I don't want to do this. It's not making my day any better. Mm-hmm. And so I just walked and that was fine. For me, that's what I needed to do. And I actually think that day is kind of when I came to the revelation in this pregnancy that like, if running does not feel good and is not making me feel better, I don't have to do it. Yes. It's okay.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because that's not easy to say, but hearing you say it helps other people to admit it to themselves as well. All right. What about a high moment for you?
Okay. So that hands down has to be the Monumental Marathon this past fall. I just, going from 2 to 3 kids was really challenging for me emotionally, and just as far as the craziness and the busyness of everything. Emotionally, taking care of 3 kids was really hard. Mm-hmm. And I ran that race with my husband, Glenn, and he didn't necessarily pace me, but he ran every step with me and fed me the words that I needed to hear when I was struggling. And, when you saw me at mile 22, like I was probably hurting pretty bad at that point. And I PR'd by about a minute and a half, which I thought I had a little bit more in me, but I was really proud of that. And so just being away from our kids, just the 2 of us running that race in a sea of people that we knew a lot of people out there, but we were still running the 2 of us together, and just hugging him at the end and knowing that how he supported me.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, through the training and the race. And it was a proud moment. I mean, I was a year postpartum and though it wasn't a super fast buildup, it was just the right timing for me. And honestly, we had just come off a really hard fall, like I've mentioned, with losing my mother-in-law, and my training did not go super smooth and my mileage was not super high leading up to that race. So I was really proud that I didn't let my low mileage and the missed workouts set the expectation for what I could physically do in that race.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And that is really cool and good, inspiring for people to hear that, you did this and could have that special moment of 1 year after having a baby. So cool. And finally, what do you tell yourself when you're standing on the start line of a race?
Calm the heck down.
Yeah. Good advice.
I would use different choice word if I wasn't being recorded on a podcast, but just calm down. Mm-hmm. Like, in the words of my good friend, Molly Turner, it's just running. So just calm down and enjoy, what you've trained your body for this, and just enjoy it. Even when it hurts, you get to be out there.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you. All right, Lindsey, how can people find out more about you? I will be putting links in the show notes, but how can people find you if they want to go find it right now?
So they can find me on Instagram. It's Lindsey Hein 626. Twitter, I'm at Lindsey Hein. And then my podcast is I'll have another podcast with Lindsey Hein.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Lindsey. This has been a lot of fun, very interesting in a different way for, focusing on something unique. Thanks for all that you do and for being a source of friendship for us during runs as well.
Thank you, Tina.
Well, what did you think? Was that helpful with the aspect of how to grow a podcast, how to start a podcast? A bit different, kind of off tangent, but hopefully it was helpful for you. And I'm sure many of you have thought about it. So why not go for it? Especially if there's one missing in what you're interested in, like Lindsey did. I'm in awe of Lindsey for all that she does with 3 boys and 1 on the way. And actually that 1 on the way may well be here by the time you're listening to this. I'm recording this episode a few weeks in advance due to my vacation, but either way, Lindsey impresses me and she means it when she says she's honest and does it for real. She's very open about her life, which is just great. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 71. And remember, you can check out the links I mentioned in the podcast for my sponsors, Hoka One with their wonderful Clifton 5s, which I wear and love, by the way, and Aptive for giving you a personal trainer to motivate you through your training. And they also have 5K, 10K, half and full marathon plans. There are links in the show notes if you need them, but I want to thank you so much for supporting me, especially if you use code RUNNINGFORREAL at hokaone.com. That really helps me to show them that I'm worthwhile, so thank you so much. Next week, I have Jared Ward on the show, and you will not want to miss this one, especially if you tend to be someone who never knows if they're quite pacing themselves right. Jared did his thesis on pacing for a reason. He's one of my favorite professional runners, really good guy. You're going to love him. So tune in next week, and until then, have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.